Good afternoon. Welcome to the lecture series, INOVAIT's annual curriculum that consists of interactive educational sessions that are designed to provide you with an opportunity to learn about the role of big data in the field of image-guided therapy and help refresh your knowledge and explore some of the key principles underlying the challenges of integrating AI into health technologies and image-guided therapy applications. Hi, my name is Ahmed Nassef. I'm the Programs Manager for Training and Networking at INOVAIT, and it's my pleasure on behalf of the INOVAIT team to welcome you here today. In this year's lecture series, we will discuss the latest trends and dynamics that are shaping the future of the image-guided therapy industry, offering a wide variety of innovative education opportunities on topics including data sharing, data procurement, and regulation of AI-enabled imaging technologies. We're very excited to kick off the series with a talk on surgical robotics and image-guided therapy interventions. But before we get into the specifics of today's lecture, I would like to make a few housekeeping announcements. All our previous lectures are archived on our website and YouTube channel. They are accessible through the website. I'll be posting a link for previous lectures in the chat shortly. The lecture series is an open license course, which means anyone is welcome to attend. The series does not require participants to have a technical background, as all concepts are defined and explained in an accessible manner. Attendance is free, but registration is required. So you can now register for upcoming lectures on our site. Again, I'll be posting the link for that in the chat shortly. With respect to organization of the course, each lecture consists of a 45 to a 50-minute talk, which is typically followed by a 15-minute of a Q&A session. Please keep your mics muted during the presentation to avoid any background noise or distraction to our speaker, and feel free to use the raise your hand feature at the end in the Q&A chat if you have any questions for our speaker. The session is being recorded, and so by staying, you are giving us consent to record and archive the video. Recording of these lectures will be available on our website later for later viewing and will be available with French subtitles. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at ahmed.nassef@sunnybrook.ca or email the INOVAIT team at innovate@sunnybrook.ca. I would also like to take this opportunity to announce that INOVAIT is now seeking applicants for its pilot fund for R&D projects that integrate image-guided therapy with artificial intelligence to advance medical innovation across Canada. The application period runs from October 24th until December 20th of 2022 and is open to Canadian corporations, academic institutions, and not-for-profit organizations. Organizations can apply for non-dilutive investments of up to $125,000 for short commercialization-oriented R&D projects. For more information, please visit our website at innovate.ca/funding. Finally, we would like to recognize the Government of Canada for their support and funding of INOVAIT through the Strategic Innovation Fund program. So shifting gears to today's lecture, starting this series with an exciting talk about surgical robotics, I'm very delighted to introduce our guest speaker, Cameron Piron. Cameron is an industry-recognized leader and innovator in image-guided surgery. Prior to co-founding Synaptive, Cameron was president and co-founder of Synaptive Medical, a medical device company that developed and manufactured advanced MRI-based breast imaging technologies. Sentinel grew to over 200 employees and over 20 million in revenues before being acquired by Hologic in 2010. Cameron studied system design engineering at the University of Waterloo, followed by a graduate degree at the University of Toronto in medical biophysics. He has been awarded a lot of awards, including the Ontario Premier's Catalyst Award for Best Young Innovator in 2008, the University of Waterloo's Alumni Achievement Medal in 2009, and he also being named to Canada's Top 40 Under 40 in 2009. And also, he was the first Canadian ever to win the R&D Magazine's Innovator of the Year award in 2008. In 2015, Cameron was named one of the Fast Company's most creative people, was recognized for his leadership in 2016 when Synaptive was named Life Sciences Ontario's Company of the Year, and was named a finalist for the 2017 Bloomberg Award in recognition of his contributions to the Canadian healthcare industry. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Cameron. Cameron, thank you very much for being our guest speaker this afternoon. And with that, I'm passing this over to you.
Thank you very much. Very kind introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today. I apologize for the strange background, but I'm at a conference and stepping away just to give this talk in a hotel room. So you'll hear the sounds of San Francisco. Hopefully not very much in the background, but that's what the honking and the yelling is. Thank you very much. I think a bit of my background I think was covered really well, but I'm an engineer turned entrepreneur, turned physicist as well, and started my career at Sunnybrook Hospital working on MRI technology, and just had a phenomenal exposure to the concept that imaging and intervention should really go hand in hand. So imaging on its own, of course, is very important for diagnosing disease, but then you need to do something about that. And I'd say really the networks in Canada, the imaging research groups, the groups in Sunnybrook and in U of T and Western Ontario and Robotics and McGill and Dalhousie are really exemplify this. They really do focus on that. And that's becoming a very important trend. And this is now advancing to helping support automation of therapy delivery and also quantification of imaging and decisions. So this is really coming at a very important time when healthcare systems are strained, probably more than any other time that I think I can think of, post-COVID, and then really trying to get back to a new normal. So the importance of automation is absolutely critical, and the importance of imaging information to support those decisions is very timely. So I really enjoyed my time in my first company I formed. It was called Synaptive Medical. You can see the product here. It was what we call an MRI coil, or it's a system that supports the patient and puts antennas very close to, in this case, the patient's breast to be able to do screening for breast cancer. And one of the images is shown below, where you're actually seeing the blood vessels, and you can see a tumor over here. And that was really quite a big advancement. And I was lucky to join a program that was underway at Sunnybrook Hospital, driven by an oncologist, Ellen Warner, who was just not accepting that the current standard of care was good enough. And the standard of care is mammography, so it's X-ray to look at electron density to be able to see very small growing tumors. But it was really failing in very high risk women. So women who had a genetic propensity to more aggressive tumors. These tumors were just not showing up as dense, and they were growing too quickly to be captured in an interval manner. So the program was really about using MRI to detect these lesions, and I had a great opportunity to be a young physicist and engineer to build the technology to make it more accessible. So we attacked a few problems. One was the cost associated with MRI. So there's some unique elements in the physics of MRI. If you build better detectors, you can image faster. If you can image faster, you can deliver a lower cost per scan. And the second challenge was, if you saw very small tumors, you needed to be able to do something about it. You needed to be able to take a tissue sample from them to diagnose whether it was cancerous or not. And kind of little did I know, this was really the start of a really exciting career to be able to push MR technology and then push the idea of intervention alongside MRI. This technology grew. We built up a large network of partners and customers, one of them being UCSF out here in San Francisco, actually. And they pushed the application of the technology even further. And the idea that some patients are missed in screening. Some people that just are not able to make it for regular screening, and they show up with very large tumors. And in a very significant tumor would be what we call a stage 4 tumor. It might have spread to other parts of the body. And the idea that imaging can be used to see if a therapy is working for a patient. So instead of rushing to surgery, you would actually deliver different chemotherapies and use imaging to see if the tumor is actually responding or not. And that was very satisfying and really exciting. And we really felt like we broke a lot of ground. However, when Hologic came knocking, it was a great time for us to integrate the technology into a much larger partner who could actually help us scale it globally. So we did a lot of work here in Toronto, and happy to grow the team to 200 people. probably most excited that a lot of that team has actually gone off and formed their own companies. So it really became a nucleus for a lot of innovation here in Canada. Personally, though, really was left unfulfilled in the idea that we could do a lot more with MRI. MRI had not really changed in the last 40 years on the fundamental premise of how it works. And we were excited about having now capital that we could actually jump in and do something much bigger. And I'm going to describe that today. And I'm going to describe how that works in the backdrop of this evolution of automation and surgical robotics that's really been unprecedented in the broad field of surgery, but I'll talk a little bit beyond surgery as well. So we are a Toronto-based company. We're just downtown at Bathurst and Richmond. We're expanding very quickly with a factory in London, Ontario, and hope to expand a factory in Mississauga here soon as well. So we worked a lot on building up a big patent portfolio at the very early days. In fact, I was talking to one of the guests on the call about that, and I felt really compelled that we had a very good idea. So we spent our money and developed a number of patents. We have over 1,400 patents, which is a lot to protect a broad vision that we have of imaging and automation. And we spent time really focused on the idea that we could transform MRI. So there's a number of imaging modalities out there. MRI is just something that I personally really excited about. It's a real pure implementation of a form of math, Fourier domain math that I really enjoy. And it's an imaging modality. It's very sensitive. Doesn't deliver any radiation, and I think is really at its early days of what it can accomplish for patients. But as we were designing the system, we were interacting with clinicians, particularly neurosurgeons, that we wanted to deliver the system to. We wanted to deliver a different type of MRI. So instead of this traditional system that fits the whole body, we wanted to specialize it for just head imaging. Head imaging is about 40% of all the scans done out there in MRI today. And we felt we could do something very different and design the system to better enable this whole suite of intervention that's happening. This idea that you can do intervention on tumors with different methods, not just surgery, but you can deliver energy to the tumor to destroy it. Laser, heat, focused ultrasound is a big focus at Sunnybrook Hospital specifically. And the ability to guide things like radiation therapy, or the ability, as we did before in breast, to be able to get signatures from the scanner or from the imaging to guide different drug delivery and actually be able to tweak and adjust those drugs to the patients. So as we were working in the background on MRI, we were uncovering a lot of gaps that were out there in traditional neurosurgery. The idea that you're guiding surgery based on preoperative imaging that's acquired before the surgery, and you would need to be able to be very accurate in the delivery of your surgical tools. And this opportunity to really integrate something I'll talk about today, tractography, the imaging of all the white matter tracts and all the connections in the brain and integrate it into surgical practice. So we started uncovering different products that we could integrate to make the surgeon's life a lot easier as we were really developing this MR technology in the background. And part of this exploration, we were watching surgeries, we were looking for opportunities to make them more efficient. And we really saw that there's a piece of equipment in the middle of the operating room that hasn't changed in decades and decades. Arguably in 50 years, it hasn't changed, the operating microscope. And if we were really to fulfill our mission of delivering better imaging to guide better therapy, we needed to remove that system. It was an analog system. It wasn't able to really integrate any digital information. So we actually became very successful at designing new optical systems and actually developing a robotics architecture that I'll talk about as well. So it's really now this whole solution that we have available to customers, and it's in offering that whole solution that we can really provide a much better service to patients at a much lower cost. So we really attacked this problem by listening to the problems and coming in with a blank slate of being able to offer new products where some of our competitors, have really almost been shoehorned into a very specific silo of their products. And once you do that, it's very hard to get out. It's very hard to displace your technology with something that's really transformative. To kind of sum up what we're doing, it's delivering an imaging first approach to automation and robotics. And this idea is very timely. You're going to see some applications of robotics And where things are moving to is the imaging is becoming the most important part of robotics. So robotics is very important to find efficient movements for the surgeon, to be able to increase their dexterity, to improve the ergonomics of the case. But you can only do so much without the ability to see better. If you can see better, you can do more. And that's kind of a cornerstone of what we're doing today. So I spend a lot of time talking to surgeons and working with my internal team, but almost as much time working with investors and bankers and going out there and getting them on board with our mission and vision and being able to get them on board as investors. One of the things that's very important is something we call a total addressable market. How big is the potential of your product? How many patients can you help? How many dollars can you help healthcare system save, or how much revenue in a very simple way can you produce? What is your opportunity to grow as a company? And it's often difficult when you're coming in with a totally new category changing technology. If you go back in early days of cell phones, how big is the market for a cell phone when it didn't exist? Well, you don't know, but you have to dream a little bit, and you have to kind of look forward and see where can this product really change things. So this is just a mapping, and I think this is very important as you're developing concepts and technologies to understand where and how big is the opportunity with your products, and be realistic about it. How big can it actually be, but also who can you address, and who actually is going to pay for the technology. So we work with MRI technology. It's a huge market opportunity, number of units and how much they are. We're applying it into new categories where there aren't imaging technologies today. And then with the robotic system, a lot of opportunity today in our current market in neurosurgery. We have about 100 systems out there today. So there's an opportunity for about 2,000 in the US alone, about 10,000 globally. And as we've been using this system, I'll introduce this idea that surgeons have been very innovative with the technology. They took the technology and applied it in all these other areas that we didn't anticipate. Spine, head and neck surgery, plastic surgery, and that's an even bigger market. So really working with your customers can help you drive and unlock new opportunities that you didn't even anticipate. And just on the bottom is a look at not just the capital equipment that we can sell, but how many people can we help per year? And as you develop new tools and instruments that are used as part of the procedure, that's a way to very rapidly grow the opportunity. Theme today is really robotics, and I did want to talk about a company that really defined surgical robotics, a company called Intuitive Surgical, and it was a company formed out of licensing technology from Stanford and robotics. Much like I licensed technology that I developed at Sunnybrook and spun that out. And the idea is that a surgeon could be decoupled from being right there with the patient and have these dexterous robots, really complicated pulley systems, to be able to improve the dexterity. They use an endoscope so you can optically visualize what's happening. And here's just a chart of their stock price. And there's a couple things I want to show you here. There's this long, grueling ramp up after they went IPO, where there wasn't a lot of value created, and then they started coming up and really growing their first indications, and then took a little bit of time and then started growing beyond that. As they launched the company, they really kind of learned about what their technology could do. They applied it first to cardiac surgery, and it was a very slow uptake. And it was actually a surgeon, urology surgeon at Henry Ford, that said, well, actually, I think a great application for this is prostate surgery, and worked with them. And that really ignited the company. They grew very rapidly off of that and grew into adjacent applications since. They've then adjusted this and be able to go after things like lung surgery as well. And the founder behind it, a really interesting story, Fred Moll. He's a serial entrepreneur. He was with the company, he founded it, but at some point he left and actually went off and did other things. And I'll pick up his story in a little bit. But this company came out of nowhere, grew a tremendous amount of value, focused on building a robotic system first, and then actually partnered with J&J to provide the tools for the system. And then at one point decided, okay, we've got enough robots, let's develop our own tools. And that really is what you see here, is this lift up of the company as they took this platform and they leveraged it to provide all of the solution that was needed in the surgical suite. Another company that was in robotics, Mako, a company that was founded in Florida. So that's why Mako Shark. they developed a robot that would actually help guide a surgeon for hip replacements and knee replacements. They were acquired by Stryker. It was one of the first big acquisitions in robotics, and Stryker took that platform and expanded it very rapidly. It was one of the biggest successes, and that was Kevin Lobo, who's actually from Canada. He's the president of Stryker, very successful. He's from Hamilton, and this technology really has changed the game for knee replacement surgery. And it's the idea of using X-ray imaging to guide the bone drilling and be able to take that very complicated process and be able to simplify it much better. This was also done in spine. So here you see a bunch of the technologies, very similar looking robotic arm. You're seeing cameras here, infrared cameras to track the drill and the guide and the devices. This was acquired by Medtronic, and the goal of Medtronic was to really link this together and be able to drive their unique product lines in spine implants and spine surgery. Actually, much like Stryker did, they linked this robot to their knee implants. So you see a bit of a theme here is people building the robotic systems to be able to deliver implants and deliver devices. And that can be a huge strategic advantage for some of these companies that are working in a very competitive space. Each of these technologies is about driving consistency, being able to really establish a new standard for surgeons. But I have to say, they are fairly limited in what they can do because the imaging that they're delivering is a little bit limited. So I kind of call this robotics 1.0. It's the first evolution of successful robotics into surgery. Now we'll go back to Fred Moll, founder of Intuitive. So he founded a company after Intuitive called Auris. And this was a company looking at lung cancer and lung biopsy. So a very different kind of problem here. You needed to not just have access points into the patient, but actually going through the airways and the complex bronchioles to be able to get to the end and be able to biopsy and remove cancers. One of the things they really learned through their launch is they need imaging for this. They need to be able to use X-ray. They need to be able to use optical imaging to be able to guide and make decisions as they're getting towards the cancer. This is really starting to be robotics 2.0. Robotics where it's really being guided and driven by optics and visualization and imaging. And this is where we are really excited. We really think there's a huge opportunity to take robotics to the next level where you're using the best imaging. And I'll qualify the best imaging as being the imaging you use to detect the disease. So if you detect the disease using MRI, you should likely do your intervention using MRI. It's seems very logical, but the problems with MRI is it's very complex. It tends to be a very tight corridor. There tends to be interactions with different metals, very hard to put compatible devices in it. So a lot of the time that MR information doesn't make its way to the robot. And that's a big opportunity we see as we go forward. Just a quick nod to other robotics. And so I've been spending a lot of time at this conference talking to customers. And really interesting things happened in healthcare since COVID. Is a lot of people have retired early just due to the stress of kind of having to be a primary care giver during COVID. So a lot of hospital staff and support staff have actually retired. There's a lot of people who are going into healthcare and they decided to do something very different. So there's a very big gap there between the people that are needed to support these services and the highly trained nursing staff and staff to run MRI equipment. And so you're seeing this really big advent of robotics to help out in different ways in the hospital. So not unsurprising, this is a Japanese company, and this is for aging patients to be able to help in geriatric centers of moving patients around, moving them from bed to chair. And this is a robotic company, Moxie. It's in the hospital, actually going around visiting patients' rooms. And so this has always been something way out there in the future, but it's actually happening now. And it's happening in response to this really critical issue we have with staffing shortages. So now back to the Synaptive story. So we developed a robot and was very much to address a need in the operating room and to really replace something that we saw as really a challenging piece of equipment to be able to express our vision. And particularly in neurosurgery, use something called an operating microscope. And that's what you see here is a surgeon looking down two oculars. If you've ever been, in biology class, you kind of put your eyes against these two lenses. all the light gets condensed to a single point in space, and you get this really great high magnification view here, as you see in the bottom right, and be able to magnify it down to 10 micron resolution. So very small, and that lets you be able to see very fine vessels and nerves so that you can either avoid them or actually do surgery on them. The problem is it provides this kind of fisheye view where you're kind of tunnel vision down to a specific point, but you lose the context of everything around you. And so there might be a bleed somewhere else happening that's filling your field that you don't see because your attention is very focused. This technology is really the standard, and this is a photo of company Zeiss that developed really the standard of care in operating microscopes in the 80s, but there hasn't been much innovation. You know, if you look at your cell phone, huge innovation in camera technology. In fact, people are filming entire IMAX videos on their phone. There's actually a first IMAX video being launched that's from an iPhone, which is pretty incredible. But that hasn't translated to the operating suite. So you really have this cumbersome system that focuses on a point. When you want to move it around during surgery, the surgeon has to drop their tools, move it around, or use a mouthpiece to move it during surgery. So you give up the ability to see better with poor ergonomics and very cumbersome procedures. A lot of other surgeons actually don't use a microscope. It takes too much time. So they use something called loops, or they're able to actually just look here with a headlamp and a pair of glasses. And it forces them to be in very contorted positions during surgery. It's actually quite astounding as you look at damage to surgeons that they're putting themselves into these complex positions during surgery. About a third of them have cervical or spine surgery themselves. So you have spine surgeons doing spine surgery, and due to the actual surgery have to have surgery done themselves. It's quite circular and very challenging for surgeons. The incidence is about 35 times higher than the standard population. So we were really motivated to do something to improve the ergonomics and also be able to provide a platform that we could integrate digital imaging on. So we worked with McDonnell Detweiler. So they're known for their work in the International Space Station. They created the robotic arm, and they're building the robotic systems for the Mars landing and also the moon base that's being built up. If you're not familiar, it's a pretty ambitious plan to establish a moon base, and they're building a lot of the robotics for that. So we built up a very sophisticated robot with what we call six degree of freedom, so six joints that can move independently. And we put a very advanced optical system on the end of the platform. And like those other robotic systems, we actually have infrared spheres so you can track very precisely the location of the robot. So we can track it down to 0.2 millimeter accuracy. And now we have a surgeon not having to look through the oculars, but looking up at a screen. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that. It improves their ergonomics. And now we're integrating the movement of the robot relative to different instruments and tools. So we've been able to achieve much higher visualization quality, as you see our system here versus a microscope, and be able to improve their ergonomics at the same time. So we've intended to launch this for neurosurgery first, but all of a sudden this problem that I described of spine surgeons became very apparent as they were really desperate for a better imaging technology. And that's what you see here is two surgeons looking across from each other as the robot is tracking their instruments and tools. And you can see up on the screen what they're actually seeing during surgery. So just a quick, I'm going to be showing surgical videos. So, you are in the imaging and medicine session here. So if you are a bit squeamish, look away. But this is a image of the robot setting up from the surgical field and zooming in at successive zoom ratios. And this is through a very small little hole. This is the size of a dime just behind the ear. And as the surgeon's zooming in here, you're seeing a nerve and you're seeing a very small blood vessel. This is about the size of a hair. And you can actually see an even smaller blood vessel in the nerve. And so if you can see these structures, you can avoid them. Or often these structures are the actual targets. You want to go in during surgery. You might want to cut out the vessel and make an attachment or replacement. You might want to put an electrode on that nerve. So if you can see these structures, you can either miss them or you can in fact target them. And now I'm going to show you the full integration of all of our products. And this is the MRI information, the tractography or the connectivity processing that we do, that's shown on the right. So this has been acquired preoperatively before the surgery. And then this is the real-time optics that we're collecting during the surgery. So as the surgeon's moving their whole tool around, the robot is able to connect the information and provide this really astounding view during surgery. And it's just so exciting seeing this all in surgery, because no longer are they kind of separate systems that don't that don't interconnect. You have this totally immersive system that looks like one system, but it's actually 4 products working together very closely. So we designed this robot with really a view that we're anticipating a lot of change coming. And I think this is a really important design principle. You design your systems not assuming nothing's going to change, but being able to take advantage of all the new processing power that's coming out, new sensor technology, make it adaptive. And that's really hard to do. But we've been able to actually demonstrate that. We created a system that we launched in 2015. We launched this as a 2D visualization system in 2017. As we learned and listened to our customers, we learned they wanted 3D visualization that we did, and voice control that we launched. As we launched voice control of the system, we learned the operative environment is actually a bit noisier than typical environments. Much like voice control technology coming out for cars was a real challenge with a lot of the background noise. So we actually have AI to be able to clean up that information and make it very adaptable to the surgical environment. So at this conference, we're just launching this system. It's the 4th iteration in 8 years. In our competition, their cadence of launch is once every 8 years. So we've been able to catch up to somebody who had a 50-year head start by designing the system to be very adaptable and very iterative. So this is just some of the features today, and I won't go into too much detail, but really exciting, taking advantage of AI, new sensor technology, new robotic technology, and then hyperspectral imaging to be able to image all these different contrast agents during surgery. The other part of the innovation of this robotics is actually surgeons, letting them use it and letting them lead us down new application pathways. So we designed this for cranial surgery, and then the spine surgeons started using it, kind of following the nerves and be able to do very precise surgery. And then we were really quite excited, the oral maxillofacial surgeons, so very complicated nerves within the face and the neck that they wanted to be able to avoid, and tumor resections that are very, very, very precise. Ear, nose, and throat surgeons applying it to very similar type sets, working down very tight, long corridors that are very difficult to access. And then very recently, plastics and oncology. And so we're doing very complicated plastic surgeries down at Cedars-Sinai. And then most recently at Stanford, they bought a system for pediatric neurosurgery. And then this is Dr. Nguyen, who would be using this for oncological surgery. So what's exciting about this is a 0.5 millimeter, 0.5 millimeter lymphatic structure. And so my world kind of comes full circle. I started out in breast imaging and looking at advanced imaging being integrated as part of surgery, but there's this complication with surgery. It's called lymphedema. And it affects about 10 million Americans. So a huge amount of the population. And after you have a surgical resection, you disrupt blood vessels and blood flow, but you also disrupt the lymphatics, which is a little more complicated of a problem. The lymphatic system is very fine little structures, and you're not able to get the fluid back from that area. And just really excited to be able to work with somebody who has the vision and the ability to really drive our technology into brand new, very complicated applications. Skip ahead a little bit here just for savings of time. But that's kind of our robotic technology, and it will be evolving to do things like guiding devices next, but in a very unique way that's really tied with the imaging. Now, one of the things that's kind of realized across my career is that imaging in MR is not what you think it is. It's often quite where things are not actually where they are. And there's this modality or method of imaging called diffusion imaging. And it's basically the movement of water molecules throughout the body. And the signal that you get from MRI comes from water. And it's very plentiful, most plentiful substance in the body. And there's a really unique way to image it that lets you actually visualize the movement of the water. And when you do that, you can actually create these traces in the brain. So you can actually image these connections within the brain and image the tracks. There's about 80 billion neurons in the brain. This method can show you the major millions of bundles throughout the brain, and I think it's quite a unique signature for everybody. This is created based off your experience. These are the connections within your brain, and when you do surgery, you want to avoid them. You want to maintain your uniqueness. So it becomes a tool not only for guidance in surgery, but also a diagnostic tool for things like head trauma and stroke. If you watch the NFL, you might see the saga of the quarterback in Miami who, has a pretty devastating head injury. And there's no doubt if you did this image, you would see severed connections within the brain that we're all hopeful will recover over time. But the idea of preserving these neurons is kind of cornerstone to what we do. You want to be able to avoid these nerves. You want to be able to maintain them and support them during surgery. But to be able to do that, you need to be able to see it. So one of the elements of what we've been doing with our MR is to reduce what we call distortion or warpage that you see in the imaging. And that's just a comparison of a big competitor's magnet and our system. This person has a dental post in their upper jaw, and it's bad enough to distort the image, and we've created a non-distorted image, which is extremely transformational in the field. And I'll describe a little bit about why we took a different view to achieve that important endpoint. Sorry, just videos logged up there. So these tracks, actually, it's interesting. Oops. Oh, sharing has stopped. Okay. Thanks for your patience here. I'm going to try to kick that off again. Apologies. I think that was my PowerPoint that just went down. Give me about 30 seconds here. I'll be able to get back up again.
No problem. Take your time, Cameron.
So those tracks is what we'll go back to is all the really exciting and different applications that you can really apply it to. We started in surgery, but as you drive forward, there's application in aging, in dementia. There's applications in the ability to actually put these probes in pediatric patients, electrodes into the brain as well. We work very close with the group here in Stanford to be able to guide them very carefully to be able to support epilepsy surgery. And now people are actually using these maps to quantify the aging brain. So somebody going in who's quite healthy but wants to know, can we pick up early signs of dementia or Alzheimer's to be able to actually deliver different drug treatments, therapies over time. And to go back to this theme of imaging and intervention, something where you use imaging to guide different delivery of different therapies. Something's happened in the last few weeks that's quite interesting. Is a huge advent in Alzheimer's drugs that we should be really cognizant of and really excited about. Is the target of breaking up the plaques that we've long suspected are a major issue in these patients. And Biogen just had a phase 3 result that showed 27% improvement in patients who took this drug. But one of the challenges is there's side effects with it. And so they've used MRI as an important baseline tool through the infusion of these different drugs to these patients. And so you actually need to image the patient several times a year to be able to make sure that these drugs are doing their job and it's safe, there's no bleeds, and there's no brain swelling. And so a really good example of something that imaging alongside drug therapy, the combination is really needed to deliver a safe outcome for the patient. And we're talking with a group out in California, and they actually believe they need like 50 MRIs just to keep up with the patient demand. And so we're just really fortunate. There's good timing to launch our technology alongside a drug that can really change the outcome of patients. In fact, the company that purchased my prior company, Hologic, had something very similar. They were using a bone densitometry system to measure bone density in patients, and it was growing okay. But then a drug called Fosamax came out where you needed to be able to monitor the health of the bone over time, and then their sales just went through the roof. And with the proceeds of that, they actually got into breast imaging. And it was the position in breast imaging that actually led to the acquisition of Synaptive. So it's kind of an interesting history there as well. So if we are the slides back, I assume they're back again.
Yes, they are.
Okay. I'll try to skip over the videos. I think I taxed the system. My apologies.
No problem.
So we're big fans of MR, but the challenge is MRI is very inaccessible. And if you've ever been in one, very claustrophobic, it's very loud. You know, you approach the room, you see all these warnings on the wall. So if you have an implant in you, you have to be careful. You have to be screened out for it. And then the cost is really big. The cost of the magnet itself, the room to hold it, but also the reinforcement of the floor. So we really felt we needed to do something very different to deliver MRI. And if you look at the history of MRI, it's actually the first MR coming from GE. Is they're not that much different. They haven't changed that much, and they've been really pushing towards bigger and bigger MR systems, bigger magnets, bigger fields to be able to do higher performance imaging. So they've been very kind of focused on one aspect of it, and that one aspect has led to huge cost and complexity. Heating issues where you have to kind of slow down the imaging in patients and things like artifacts during the imaging. So it's an incredible tool, but it kind of hit its peak with really focusing on one aspect. So we really wanted to focus on something else, is tone down the field strength and then push up the performance of every other element of the magnet, which proves to be a lot harder. You have to really master all these different expertise in gradient technology and transmit technology and pulse sequences and squeeze every bit of performance out of the MR you can. But when you do that, you can provide a smaller system where smaller is actually better. And in the medical case, it means we're going to be able to provide more access for MRI. We're going to be able to provide more consistent and quantitative imaging at a safer safety profile as well. And from the business side, which is important to track, we can deliver affordable MRI. We can have much better improvements to workflow and disruptions in the radiology department, and also let radiology help expand itself into areas like the operating room and emergency department and areas like ICU. And so an area that's very important in the emergency department, this is work with our first partner in Dalhousie, is something we might all be familiar with, is stroke. So stroke care has evolved very, very rapidly in recent years. So the idea that you have a stroke and you have a patient recover over time has been changed with early intervention. So either clot busting drugs or removal of clots during a procedure. The standard of care is X-ray. So an X-ray is really quite good at detecting most strokes, but a lot of strokes are missed, kind of like the analogy of what we were doing in breast MRI. So in this case, this was a stroke that was missed, and you could see it here on our MR system. So huge opportunity to help this patient early and help their care recovery long term. And part of this study, we were comparing it to 3 Tesla, so kind of the most expensive, highest performance imaging system. And we were just really excited to show we had equivalent image quality to 3 Tesla, but also we could detect more strokes, and you can detect many more strokes and help many more patients. We then kind of use the system for tumor imaging. This is our system here. This is our one of our competitors' high performance 3T imaging system. And you can see things here that you don't need to be a radiologist to appreciate. You have better contrast, you'd have lower distortion, and you can see the tumor very well. So really, really excited by this. And the response we're getting from the market is tremendous. So we turned down the field strength, we improved the ability to see different structures, and we're able to improve the signal to noise with a number of engineering efforts to get this forward. So this is quite a big accomplishment. This really lets us take this system and really get it out of radiology into all these other disciplines. Radiology will still read these scanners, but it means that they actually have the ability to detect and detect patients at much earlier points. And Raphael put this in here for you. So there's a lot of challenges at midfield and a lot of assumptions that were made that you couldn't do things complex things like tractography and diffusion and in this case thermal imaging. And our team has been able to go after and kind of approach it from a different vantage point and come up with unique ways to do this imaging. And this idea of measuring temperature to monitor treatment is really becoming a very exciting area. You can measure the ablation of laser, you can measure focused ultrasound, hitting its critical temperatures for ablating tissue. And we were actually able to really kind of break the sound barrier here, where we can image full volume imaging in a second and within a degree Celsius. So our engineering team did a great job here, and I was really proud to show it at this conference. But we could really do things that you assume this would be impossible to do at midfield. And it really does marry this intervention plus imaging concept. Something also very new, just as of last week, is things like deep brain stimulator placement, the ability to put electrodes in the brain, kind of like putting electrodes on the heart to pace pulse, pace heart rate, or muscular activation in the heart. You can do the same in the brain, and this is a really big innovation. The idea to put electrodes in the brain, but targeting and knowing where they are is very difficult. And so we have a unique way of imaging that you can see these very difficult to image targets, substantia nigra and the STN and the red nucleus. So these are all really precision, very careful things to image that are really hard to do. And we really are able to see them uniquely that we're really excited about. So we're able to really think about marrying all these different things together, where imaging can now be done, the gold standard of imaging, with the interventional technique. So a lot of work, more work to do, but a lot of really big challenges that we've been able to solve already. So just a bit about the company. So we're about 200 people. We have a global footprint. We have customers around the world. We do production in Toronto. We have our own patent team. We do our own regulatory approvals. We have our own service and sales team, and we're really growing that as a focus so that we can sell our equipment directly to customers and then be able to service and do clinical applications or hospital support for the technology. For the most part, we sell directly, but we have great distributors that help us sell and support in the Gulf region, Europe, and Australia. And we do have a partnership with Stryker, who's one of the biggest neurosurgical companies or surgical companies in the world. It's a bit of our team. So it was a nice mix of my founders, Gall West Dave, plus Alex and Josh, who came from our first company. So we are already kind of a ready-made team. And then we've been able to add some great talent. Magnus, who is the CFO at Varian, a huge radiation therapy company. Sean, Michael, who had senior roles at GE. Linda, who came from Siemens. So we're able to get this really nice combination. And Dylan, who's been building up our IP portfolio. Just, I'll tell you, that was a great add as a company, being able to bring in patent lawyers early, because those expenses can get out of hand for you as you're growing very quickly. So a really diverse skill set of people. And then, just kind of reflecting back on what our product does is it's capital equipment, which often is a bit of a challenge to get in a hospital. But it really provides a footprint to be able to bring in your other technologies and be able to have you help your customers find those efficiencies and find those improvements in care pathways. So you kind of look at where the revenue comes from, just to put the business hat on the side, business hat on for a second, is you're trying to implement these systems. There's typically a service component that's recurring over years, which is very helpful. And then there's consumable components as well. So these are the things used during the procedures. We've taken a very different approach as a company. We don't want the consumables to limit the adoption of the technology. So I mentioned Intuitive Surgical, a great technology, but in Ontario, where we have a pretty constrained budget in terms of what we can do, we can't just go out there and spend uncontrolled because it is a public system. They spend a lot of time looking at the health economics of the system. How much does the robot help versus the cost associated with it? And many countries have found this around the world. The cost of the consumables or the cost per use are so high that they just can't support it in some of these healthcare systems. And I think this is one of the benefits being a Canadian company. It's a constrained ecosystem here, but I'll tell you, if a technology can work in Canada and can fit the health economic constraints that we have here, it means it's going to do very well in the US. It means it can transfer over to Europe. It can transfer well into countries like we're in Pakistan. We're actually the first robot ever to be used in surgery in Pakistan. And in fact, that's transferred to actually having 3 sites doing the technology, and there's no Intuitive Surgical systems there today. So I think building technology with a vision of where, I think it's a commentary it's used a lot in Canada, where the puck's going. And really, I think we anticipate things as we go forward, quantitative care, linking imaging with intervention, and cost-constrained systems around the world. If you really do want to help a global population, you need to really design your systems to be efficient and cost effective. Sorry, I want to make sure there's a bit of time for us to speak. Just want to say where we're going. We now have our MR technology, so we're able to drive all these different different exciting applications with the system, be able to link it with the robot, so you can kind of see that real-time validation of what you're seeing in surgery with what you're detecting. Being able to bring these together for the first time. And we're just announcing a partnership here at the conference with a company out of France, Panaxium. They create these electrode arrays that we're now integrating as part of our surgical procedure. They can actually detect brain activity during surgery, so you can preserve different neuronal structures. And we have a phenomenal partnership forming with a group in the Rothschild Institute in France, Paris. And they'll be using this to actually look at the margin of the tumor. So when you think you've removed all the tumor, you can lay this in the cavity and be able to electrically excite the boundaries of it. And what they found is actually there's like a epileptic signature in areas where the tumor is still invading. So we want to push that boundary to be able to do these resections more safely and more effectively. And great to be able to not just develop technologies internally, but be able to have partners like Panaxium. So that's a research project, but really, really excited about kind of expanding our application set. And a lot of patients we want to help out there. We focused on neuro and spine, but huge opportunities for us in ear, nose, and throat, and plastics, and anywhere where precision surgery is really something that's important. Great, thank you very much. Hopefully I've left some time here for some questions as well.
Thank you very much, Cameron. That was an excellent talk on robotics and latest advancement in the field of imaging therapy and how it integrates with many fields. You're talking about drug therapy, neurosurgery, and other clinical domains, as well as the amazing work of Synaptive Medical in the area of surgical robotics and the huge possibilities to transform the healthcare system and practice. Before opening this for questions, a quick reminder again that this session is being recorded, and by staying, you are giving us consent to record and archive the video. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them for Cameron. Annie? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, that was great. Really interesting to hear how you compared your progress and the technology to some of the other robotic systems in the market right now. My main question for you is at the beginning of a project, so identifying a need, what kind of excites you more? Is it something that you see that the technology is just incredibly far behind, so there's a lot of technological room for improvement? Or is it something more like the MRI improvements that you were talking about, where there's something that you could really improve the efficiency and the effectiveness to increase access? So is it more like a technological thing that excites you, or, we could definitely make this new technology super accessible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the one thing that I just really privileged to do what I do is, I can be a bit dangerously enough in clinical that I can understand it, but certainly not practice it, and maybe help identify some of the problems, and then work with the clinicians to really arm in arm say, how can we apply technology to these problems that either have been long-standing and highlighted, or maybe sometimes you're so busy delivering care that you don't appreciate that problem's there. Like the surgical microscope is, everyone's assumed, well, that's the way it is. I'm not nothing I can do here. So coming a fresh perspective in, I think, is really satisfying, because it's a new solution space, and I see myself mainly as an engineer, and there's great technologies in the world today. And if you can apply it appropriately and really be guided by the clinicians, you can make a big impact without necessarily having to, invent something absolutely fundamental. You can bring technology from robotics and apply it in the operating room. You don't have to build a new robot. You can really apply a robot from another field. And I think that's a way to get the biggest leverage, for how you can help patients, how you can help healthcare systems with the least amount of invested capital that you need to go in. So it's very exciting building a brand new superconducting magnet. Huge amount of effort. It means I spend most of my time out there fundraising and looking at spreadsheets and PowerPoints, opposed to doing any engineering. But there's some really quick wins that can happen out there that I think everyone really gets excited by, and that's how we can make healthcare a lot more accessible.
Thanks.
Thank you. I do have a quick question for you, Cameron. You know, I think the promise that comes with AI and robotics by making technologies and devices more reliable, safer, accurate, is generating a growing interest in finding ways to integrate these novel technologies. But, you know, the reality is there is always going to be slower adoption than you see in other technology areas. And part of that, I think, is because many clinical partners are concerned about disintegration because this is a new paradigm for them. So given that Synaptive has expanded distribution to multiple jurisdictions, including the USA and Asia, and I love the slide that you shared about, you know, partners and distributors that you have across the globe. What would be your advice to other Canadian businesses hoping to mirror Synaptive's export success? I know that there are a lot of startups in our target audience who are looking to scale up and potentially enter new markets. And I know they would be specifically interested, you know, from your extensive experience, what might be some of the best practices that Synaptive has taken to boost clinical adoption and gain a foothold in the global medical device market?
Yeah, there's you know, it's certainly a big topic. I think maybe I'll take the first one on for distributors. You know, there's all these decisions of what you're going to do and what you're not going to do, and really focus on what you're really good at. You know, are you going to be producing the product? Because there's a lot of partners you can have out there that can do the production for you. Are you going to, you know, distribute and sell it, or are you going to use a partner to distribute and sell? And it really needs to be a reflection on your strengths and weaknesses as a company and how much capital you have. Building a sales and marketing team is a very expensive endeavor. It's actually more expensive than kind of building a production plan often in what you're doing. It takes time. It takes time to kind of get the right people, you know, and often the salespeople you bring on at the beginning are very different than the sales team that you have as scaling as a company at the end. You know, you want to keep everybody, but often it's a very different, you know, set of people and what they're good at. And, you know, I think personally, I think it's very important to have that contact with your customer and being, in our case, in the operating room with them, seeing how they use the technology, but also listening to their ideas of where they can drive it. And often if you have a distributor who's in the operating room instead of you, then you have a bit of broken telephone. And so I think if you can focus on a local market and really get that feedback, that's exceptional. In fact, there's a company in Ontario, Vina, that I think is doing that. You know, they're focusing in Ontario and perfecting their product, and I think that's brilliant. I think it's hard to do though, because traditionally, Canada is not a first adopter for a lot of these technologies, and often it could be budgetary reasons. You know, I think that depends where you are. It's changing a little bit, but if you want to perfect it in your home market, if you can, keep it very close to keep your engineers close to your customers. Your product's going to have to iterate if you want to perfect it, and so that connection, I think, is really a sacred connection that you want to establish. So I think that's a very important consideration as you kind of grow your company.
Thank you. Gord?
I have a quick question. How do you sell a product when you don't have a billing code?
Hi, Gord. You always come with the hard questions. That's a good one. I think it becomes very hard. I mean, in fact, I had some good discussions at this conference, and you know, the reality is the biggest market in the world is the U.S. and a lot of healthcare is driven based on billing codes in the U.S. And if you don't have a billing code, you need more money and you need time to be able to go out there and prove it and spend time validating it. And that takes a lot of money. But if you do it right, you know, you can really do a good job and you can really kind of corner a market. I'll give an example of work, and this, I don't think this company's around anymore, so I can talk about it. Is a competitor that we had in our first company called Confirma, and they did a CAD product, or computer-aided diagnostic product, that was able to take advantage of a billing code that was out there. It was like 3D visualization billing code. And then another company came along and they said, okay, we want to, you know, expand that billing code. And in the process of it, highlighted that this billing code was being used from others, and that billing code got removed. So you got to be really careful in the process. Is there's a fine dance of what codes are used where. I think there's great clinicians that are often very involved in the billing efforts and the reimbursement code efforts, and it's really worthwhile speaking with them up front. I think everyone should be pulling in the same direction. The payers, the insurance companies. Your product's good, and you can deliver a good service, and you can ultimately help the patient and reduce costs. Healthcare systems like paying for that; they're okay with it, right? So, but you need alignment on those codes. So it's a tricky process. But I quite honest, we build complex surgical systems, we build MRI systems, but we tend to fall into the current codes. So we don't, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in that perspective. I think it's a pretty nuanced approach. And I think often you see big companies with big budgets being able to go after that. The Medtronics, the Strykers, the Boston Scientifics, and they have huge regulatory and they have huge billing teams that do just that.
Perfect. Thank you. Any final questions, comments for Cameron? Okay. This is great. Okay, so thank you so much, Cameron. It was a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon, and we truly appreciate you taking the time during your business trip to join us today and educate our attendees. Thanks to everyone who have joined us today. Please know that our next lecture is taking place on Wednesday, November 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we're having a panel discussion with expert regulators from Health Canada, the FDA, and the UK, and an exciting discussion about regulating AI-enabled technologies. So please mark your calendars and register for the event through our website, innovate.ca. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cameron.